All right, welcome everybody. I'm going to call the meeting to order. We do have a quorum tonight. This is the Monday, April 15th, 2019 regular meeting of the Edina School Board. Wow, this system works great. All right, so John, can you just go over the agenda for us briefly?
Yes, while we have a lot of recognition, they're all sitting in the room here tonight, so that'll be great. We have some consent items and accommodations that we'll go over in recognition. We're going to have a presentation about our community education program by Val. The school district is starting a curriculum study in science and engineering. So the discussion around that and policies. And there's several action items around long-term facilities maintenance, some renovations at the Edina Community Center, Normandale Elementary, Creek Valley Playground, and then some other policies. So that's about it for the agenda.
Great, thank you. First agenda item is approval of the minutes. Can I get a motion to approve the March 11th work session minutes, the minutes from the March 11th regular meeting, and the minutes from the April 9th work session?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any changes to the minutes? All right, all those in favor of approving the minutes from the March 11th work session, March 11th regular meeting, and the April 9th work session, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried. All right, next we are on to recognitions. The first recognition is Claire Anderson-McElligott. Where is Claire? Oh, there you are.
So my name is Erik Anderson. Hello. So my name is Erik Anderson, and this is Claire Anderson-McElligott, and she is here tonight because she had the outstanding information passed on to her just recently from last year, actually, that she achieved a 120 out of 120 on the Advanced Placement U.S. Government and Politics test for last year. You might wonder why it took so long to get the information. We're kind of wondering that as well. But Claire, I just got some information. We have about 120 to 140 ninth grade students that take the test every year. We've offered it for 7 years now at the ninth grade level. And so she's the first that we know of that has gotten a perfect score on the test in ninth grade at Edina. Nationally, Claire is one of 113 students to ace the test last year out of 326,292 people around the country and around the world that take the test. Which is 0.034% if you're counting at home. Okay, so big round of applause. And of those 326,000 people, students, only 10,205 were ninth graders. So a very small number of students take this ninth grade year, and Claire was one of 9 total ninth graders to get a perfect score in the whole entire country. So another outstanding accomplishment. The test is rigorous. It's 60 questions, multiple choice in 45 minutes. It's 4 essays, 25 minutes each for a total of 100 minutes. And obviously any one little thing can go wrong in the meantime. And it's amazing. It's an amazing, amazing accomplishment. So just a couple questions for Claire. I'm not going to ask too many, but do you want to tell the story about your friends and the studying episode?
Yeah, so I was going to study with my friends. It was mid-April about this time last year, and they had already started studying. They bought their study books, and we were in the library, and I opened my study book. It was brand new. I'd never opened it before. They were like, "You haven't started studying yet?" I was like, I didn't know I was supposed to do that, but apparently it was fine.
Turned out all right.
It turned out all right. I have a good teacher. Yeah.
And another thing, Claire is obviously a very bright student, but really what I enjoy about Claire in the classroom is she combines a lot of knowledge and a lot of skill in our debating program as well. And she integrates the debating aspect with the class. And you want to talk about that really quick, how that works out?
Sure, yeah. So I do debate, and it's usually a resolution about the United States federal government. And I find it useful, especially in government. It was super useful because I had some background knowledge about how the government works and who passes the laws, and it was helpful to have that. And yeah.
Great. So ninth graders in the crowd, you get a chance. Okay, it can happen. Mark, it can happen. So congratulations to Claire, and I just thank you for having her and knowing what a great and rare honor this is for our students. So thank you.
Next, we have a recognition of the boys' Alpine ski team.
Okay, my name is Troy Stein. I'm the assistant principal and director of athletics and activities at the high school, and certainly excited to be here tonight to recognize four outstanding winter teams that not only advanced to the state tournament but won state championships. It's been a remarkable year. Certainly, we don't measure success purely on wins and losses and winning state championships, but we like to recognize it when they do because it's a special accomplishment. So what I'd like to do is pass the mic. I'm going to have them introduce themselves, tell us your grade, and then tell us how long you have been skiing in your lifetime. Okay?
All right. My name's Carl Bergholt. I'm a senior, and I've been skiing for about 12 years.
My name is Andrew Samo. I'm a senior, and I've been skiing for 16 years.
I'm Gavin Richards. I'm a sophomore and somewhere around 8 years.
I'm Adam Burkhold. I'm a 9th grader. I've been skiing for 10 years.
My name's Will Ottendorfer. I'm a 9th grader, and I've been skiing for 10 years.
I'm Jared Scribner. I'm the head coach, and we're missing one other team member, so Tanner Hopkins, and he's been skiing for a couple weeks too. So he's, I think he's got a baseball game tonight. So I've been the coach at Edina this is my 3rd year as the head coach, and been a privilege to be able to coach these guys. They're a great group of guys. They get along really well together. It's awesome as a coach when you have that team chemistry, and it's a lot of fun. They worked hard. They earned it. So really appreciate all the effort they put in.
All right. So if we can give boys Alpine Ski one more last round of applause. A special accommodation. I'm going to give it for you in the center.
Sweet.
And you can hold that up, and we'll look this way for one final picture here. If you like each other. All right. Thank you. Thanks for coming. I think I gave them all. I gave you all. I need the other ones.
Next is boys swim and dive.
Thank you. Sorry. Swim and dive. Swim and dive.
They're coming in.
Well, I don't know how they balance it in school.
All right, so we're here welcoming our swim and dive team, if you didn't figure out what their sweatshirts. Congratulations on winning the state championship this year. This group has worked extremely hard over the years, and one of those sports where individually it's a competitive sport to be in the water in your own thoughts for a couple hours and continually push yourselves. And I'm continually amazed at how well they do that, and they do it with class and dignity. And so extremely proud of all of you. What I'd like you to do is introduce yourself, your grade, and then tell us a little bit about what you're thinking about in those grueling practices. Okay, just a quick couple sentences. What keeps you motivated in your own mind when you're practicing like that?
I'm Kai. I'm in 9th grade, and I'm just trying to get through it, thinking about the next thing.
I'm Matt. I'm in 9th grade, and a lot of the motivation comes from the food afterwards.
I'm Max. I'm in 9th grade, and same thing with Matt. I just think about what I'm going to eat afterwards.
I'm Henry. I'm in 11th grade, and I like just playing a song over and over in my head.
I'm Gabe. When the season's done.
I'm Patrick. I'm a freshman. I also like to think about the food.
I'm JJ. I'm a sophomore, and yeah, the food.
I'm Michael. I'm a junior. I usually just watch the clock till it's over.
I'm Jacob. I'm a junior, and I usually just think about what's next.
I'm Jake. I'm a senior. And like Henry, kind of listen to music in my head.
My name's Keegan. I am a sophomore, and I've got a true love for the sport, and so really just trying to find out what our end goal is always what gets me through.
I'm Andrew. I'm a senior, and just training hard so we can win the next big meet.
I'm Liam. I'm a junior, and just supporting teammates and putting the hard work in.
My name is Scott Johnson. I'm the head coach of the boys swimming and diving team. I can vouch for these gentlemen. They're not only outstanding athletes and swimmers, but they're also men of high character. Very proud to have them represent Edina High School, Edina Public Schools, and the community of Edina wherever we go. They always put on a good show in the water, and they're very humble in winning. And I don't know how they are in defeat because we weren't defeated this year. So, I guess so I don't know how we do there, but they do very well, and I'm very proud. And we look forward to great things with them in the coming years as well.
All right, yeah, one round of applause again. So to add to it, so this is the third time in school history that boys and girls have won in the same school year. Is that correct? Okay, so an amazing feat, and I know that both programs are going to be shooting for it again next year. So we expect nothing less, Coach. All right, one last picture here. Look this way. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Make it sure I'm good for you. Thanks. Tell girls hockey to come in.
That's what I was thinking about today.
All right, next is girls hockey. They'll be in a minute.
All right, well, let's welcome our girls hockey team. So for the first time in state history, our girls hockey team and our boys hockey team won the Class AA state championship. Certainly first time in school history as well. So congratulations to all of you. And if you would please just introduce yourself, your name, your first name, last name, your grade, and then what position you played for the year.
Hi, I'm Hannah Chorsey, and I'm a sophomore, and I played a little bit of center and right wing.
I'm Katie Davis. I'm a junior, and I played right wing.
I'm Annie Keel. I'm a senior, and I played center.
I'm Sophia Dahl. I'm a junior, and I played defense.
I'm Evelyn Adams. I'm a senior, and I played defense.
I'm Lucy Bolby. I'm a junior, and I played left wing. I'm Cece Bolby. I'm a senior, and I played center.
I'm Haley Maxwell. I'm a freshman, and I played defense.
I'm Ellie Strittmatter. I'm a senior, and I played goalie.
I'm Jane Keel. I'm a freshman, and I played center.
I'm Mallory Uline. I'm a senior, and I played defense.
I'm Sarah Swan. I'm a sophomore, and I played goalie.
I'm Olivia Swaim. I'm a senior, and I played forward.
I'm Allie Ron. I'm a senior, and I was manager.
I'm Lily Armaglas. I'm a senior, and I was manager.
I'm Olivia Statine, and I was a manager as well.
I'm Ellie Lee, and I'm an assistant coach. Sammy Reber, the head coach.
So, Sammy, tell us a few things on the year.
Yeah, it was a super fun year. Our third year as coaching these guys. We had our ups and downs, our battles and everything, but these girls made it fun coming to the rink every single day. Gonna miss our 6 seniors on the team, and glad that they were able to go out with a bang by winning state this year. But yeah, just very thankful for this group of girls in front of you guys. And yeah, it was just an overall really fun year for everyone.
Squeeze together again for one more picture and look that way.
All right, next we're going to have the boys hockey team. They will be in shortly.
Keep coming this way. Keep coming this way. Okay, so let's give a round of applause to boys hockey. Welcome them tonight. So with boys hockey, they won the last winter state title, which brought our school record to 181 state championships, the most in any other high school by far in the state of Minnesota. And like we talked about at the beginning of this, and we really strive for with all of our programs is to represent Edina in a great fashion, in first-class attitude and approach all the time. And these guys, along with the 3 prior teams, really strive for that, and I know they work hard on that. And I know that Coach Giles is back here, but I was impressed to see when the mic was put in his face at the end of that state championship game, and they said, you know, the expectation must be to win all the time. How do you handle that? And he just said, you know what? We are here to develop fine young men, and that's our definition of success. So, thank you for being here. I would like to just have you introduce yourself, your grade, and if you're a senior, tell us where you're going to college next year. Okay?
Hi, I'm Luke Rugemer, and I'm a junior.
Liam Malmquist, senior, undecided.
Jet Jungles, senior, Northern Michigan.
Mason Reiners, senior, undecided. Kevin Delaney, senior, Minnesota.
Loudon Hogue, sophomore.
Mike Vorlicki, senior, Wisconsin.
Grant Martin, I'm a junior.
Mason Evers, senior, and then I'll be playing juniors next year.
Jake Boltman, junior.
Nick Williams, sophomore. Peter Colby, senior, undecided. Cole Kavanaugh, junior.
Drew Bishop, senior, undecided.
Michael Shoemaker, senior, U of M.
I'm Gunnar Johnson, I'm a junior. Jack Wolf, senior, Minnesota.
Brett Torisky, senior, undecided.
Josh Harding, assistant coach.
Kurt Giles, Edina High School next year. So.
Dick Blueston, undecided.
Dave Terwilliger, I hope to be back.
Kurt, come on up here. Coach, say a few words on how the season went from your perspective.
Well, this is a really highly regarded group of kids that we've had. We're extremely proud of them. The way they conduct themselves, the way they carried themselves all year. They obviously had a successful season, but the big thing is with these guys is, as a group, one of the best groups of kids we've had. Strong supporters of the school, good students, good citizens, so we're extremely proud of them. So that's pretty much all I got to say. Good group of kids, great group of kids.
And congratulations. Thank you. And if I can get this to you. And if we can get one last picture, I'm going to ask you guys to squeeze a little tighter here. And you're going to look at the camera this way. Yeah, you might have to go on a knee.
Where are we going here? Oh, we're going a little diagonal here. I like this. We got a little rotate here.
All right, thank you. One last round of applause. Thank you.
Enjoyed being there, didn't you?
I did. That was really
All right. All right, everybody. That was great. Let's have one more round of applause for everybody. I know they've left, but still. Great. All right, next we are moving to hearing from members of the audience. We do have a time period each meeting for members of the community to come and speak to the board. They are limited to 3 minutes in time for speaking to the board. If you have complaints about individual members, we ask that you not raise them during that time period, but instead you bring them to the attention to the superintendent or another individual at the district. Typically, questions that are raised at tonight's meeting will get answered separately by the superintendent or responsible person giving a call back. And with that, our first speaker is Mr. Wayne Wenger. Welcome again.
About avoiding future conflicts of interest at the Edina School Board. During the 2017 school board election, the teachers union endorsed 5 candidates. They spent thousands of dollars mailing postcards to all the households to support those 5 candidates. The reason the teachers union does that is to elect school board members that are sensitive to teachers' interests, including higher salaries. And yet at the same time, we've got a situation where our income is going up about 2% every year, and our expenses are going up 3%. And this past year, I've heard many conversations about important programs and decisions to make cost cuts, and it's a real challenge. And maybe we've delayed maintenance or investments in schools, and sometimes we don't invest money in programs that are good for our kids. Teachers' payroll is a large expense for the school. If the school board votes for a teacher's salary increase greater than expected revenues, they're being fiscally irresponsible. A conflict of interest arises when school board members who the teachers union helps elect vote for salary increases greater than revenue increases. To avoid this, I recommend that the school board create a policy beginning with the 2019 elections that the school board candidates do not seek endorsement by the teachers union. Further, that if the teachers union does endorse a successful school board candidate, that individual must recuse themselves from voting on all salary contracts with the teachers union. I'll send you a copy of this letter tonight, and that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Michael Birdman. Welcome.
Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Michael Birdman. I have a student, a fourth grade student at Highlands in CP, and a daughter who's in second grade at Normandale. The reason for my coming forth this evening is that we've been recently diagnosed with several different learning disabilities with my son, all for which we had to determine what that was. We were the ones who had to determine what his needs were, what the assessment was, what the programs that were going to be there for him. He has ADHD, he has dyslexia, and he has dysgraphia. We've been working with the school at Highlands, along with outside physicians to determine what's best for him. He is not a non-functioning or substandard or failing student at Highlands. In fact, he's in gifted math, and he has struggled with writing because of his dysgraphia. He does able to read, but he needs help with kind of learning what he needs to do from a phonics standpoint. His math is going to start to suffer because of the fact that he can't do more advanced reading from that standpoint. So even though he's on the 98th percentile, he will eventually start to come down from that. The biggest challenge I see is that the school doesn't seem to be prepared or have the skills necessary to first help us identify what those needs were. Now that we've identified those needs and come to the school, we now have an IEP in place, but we're the ones who had to drive what that was going to be. Now, I have a master's degree, and I am a leader in the community and business and so on and so forth. I am not educated in what it is to be a child psychologist and an educator. I'm looking for what are the needs that I as a parent, as well as any other parent out there, who needs to figure what this is out. Lastly, is that we've come to the conclusion that for fifth grade, which we'd like to have him continue at Highlands, we probably will not be able to do so because Highlands will not be able to produce the types of skills and services that we need to have. And so we're gonna have to take him out of the district in order to get him the needs that he has. Now, we're capable of doing that. Is everybody who lives in Edina capable of doing that? I'm not here to advocate for services for me or my son, but I am asking you to take seriously reading proficiency within the school district. Everybody should be able to learn to read at the level that they are at, whether they're at the high end of the socioeconomic scale or the lower one. And what are we doing as a community to prioritize that in school? I should be able to bring my kid back once I get that for him, and I hope to do so, but I shouldn't have to do that. But I'm left with that as the responsibility as a parent to do that for my kid. Thank goodness he's in my family. If there's other people in our community who could not afford to do that, what would you do about that? I'd ask you to consider that as you're thinking about your strategic plan, what services you provide for reading, math, dyslexia, dysgraphia, all those other services, and how on earth do you help parents identify these things early and help them navigate this very tricky process for doing so. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Matt Stump. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and ladies and gentlemen of the board. I appreciate the opportunity to come here and talk to you. My name is Matt Stump. I'm a fairly recent resident of Edina, and I'm here to ask for guidance on how to have one of the school board policies reconsidered. Specifically, this is Appendix 1 to Board Policy 713, and I'll just read it for the record and the benefit of others here. This is a policy that states the state of Minnesota currently requires transportation services for students who reside more than 2 miles from school. Edina Public Schools provides transportation to elementary students K through 5 who live more than 0.7 miles from school, and middle and high school students who live more than 1 mile from school. Students that attend a school other than their assigned school because of their interdistrict transfer or are open enrolled are not eligible for transportation regardless of distance from the school. So I'd like the board to consider changing that policy to make the maximum distance from school for elementary age students be closer to walking distance for those elementary school age students. I understand that transportation services don't come without a cost. I get that, but I think another way to look at a policy that requires kids that are in K through 5, grades K through 5, to provide their own transportation that live, half of a mile, 6/10 of a mile from school, to really be tantamount to delegating that cost back to parents. And I think that there's a really good opportunity here to be more efficient and leverage economies of scale by shortening that maximum distance. So this is my first board meeting. It's actually my first political activity ever. So I'm not exactly sure what the next steps would be. I would just ask for the board to maybe reconsider that maximum distance or provide guidance on the best, most effective way to try to lobby for that change. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next is Matt Shearer. Oh, I think what Matt is referring to is that we have a 6:30 session in which you can bring questions in as long as you let us know a week in advance, and then there's more of an exchange where the question will get a response at that particular meeting. And yes, if you've got a short follow-up, you can go ahead. This isn't the 6:30.
I actually submitted as a Q&A topic the first time, but then got guidance that it might be more effective to just come and present to the board. But if it makes more sense to do a Q&A topic, I can certainly come back next month and we can address it that way.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't worry, I didn't start your time yet.
Thanks, Mr.
Welcome.
Chair and members. My name is Matt Shearer, and I have a first grader at Creek Valley Elementary, and actually I'm here to talk about the same issue that the prior testifier was here to talk about. I want to preface my comments first, letting you know that I grew up in the area, and I walked to school every day for first grade through 11th grade, and I served as a crossing guard at Creek Valley, and I also am currently sitting on the Edina Transportation Commission. A couple of things that we received an email today that basically said that since we're right on the border, we currently have busing, we're no longer going to get busing next year, so I wanted to come and talk to you today. First, I'd like to observe that after reading statute and school policy, how the distance is calculated is not well defined. From that perspective, it says 0.7 miles. My house is within a 0.7 mile circle. However, if you actually walk the distance, it's 0.8 miles to the school. So I think I would contend that I'm actually inside of the transportation zone, but I'm not the one that's determining how that's calculated. Second, not all schools in Edina, particularly elementary schools, I would say would be considered neighborhood schools. In particular, two stand out to me, Cornelia and Creek Valley. Both of which are abutted by major highways, major roads, and the bulk of the area that would be impacted around Creek Valley would require students to travel winding roads that feature hills, many blind corners, no sidewalks, and crossing a road that has similar daily traffic to West 70th Street with none of the traffic calming that has been installed on West 70th Street. That's Gleason Road at Indian Hills Pass. I did call the school today and I talked to the director of transportation. I asked if there was going to be any changes for crossing guards because there's no crossing guards at that closer location. And that's not something that's been thought of. So I think it would be nice if you try to couple this change with thinking about how we're going to get kids to and from a school safely. And also as a transportation commission member, I did want to say that it's our goal to make roads safe for all modes of transportation in Edina. That being said, we've identified the area along Indian Hills Pass for a sidewalk, but that funding isn't going to come through for a number of years. So trying to make these changes by not thinking about how the whole system works in Edina is a little challenging. Additionally, some of my other neighbors who live along the frontage road on 169, you'd be asking those kids to basically walk on a frontage road where routinely cars drive 40 miles an hour. There is no sidewalk. There's not even a curb. So I don't know how these kids are going to safely get to and from school without transportation if their parents can't drive them. And finally, I did want to say that I did a little research today and that all school districts are different. Bloomington is anyone beyond 0.5, Edina is beyond 0.7, Richfield beyond 1, and Eden Prairie is beyond 2. And for those of you with little kids, you might be familiar with Sesame Street song, one of these things is not like the other, and actually for this instance, it's Edina. All of the other school districts offer a pay-for-service model for people that are within that area. And I wouldn't be opposed to paying for the privilege of allowing my student to be able to take the bus, but we don't have that option. So that's something I think you should consider to, for those of us that their students have to cross a really significant road in order to safely get to school. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Siobhan White. Welcome.
Do you all have your decks?
We do.
Yes, great. I'll get to them in a second. My name is Siobhan White, and I am the parent of a sixth grader at Southview and a third grader at Normandale. My question tonight is, why have Edina Public Schools gone all in on personalized learning? We were told that PL was going to help all students grow, particularly those who are struggling the most to reach grade standard. I've spoken to you before about how PL looks in practice. One teacher facilitating 4 levels of kids in the same classroom. High-performing kids can get a hall pass to work independently. Kids who struggle the most can meet with the teacher for extra help. And all the kids get the same content, whether the content is appropriate for the student's learning level or not. Here's an example. My son will be reading The Phantom Toll Booth in Language Arts 6. The problem is that this was a novel study choice in 4th grade gifted reading. Yet Edina doesn't offer an advanced Language Arts 6 class, nor one for science or social studies. Whether your child's in the bottom 10% need support services or in the top 90% or anywhere in the middle, all students are in the same class, being presented with the same grade standard content and learning at the same pace. The principal of Edina High School has said he favors only 2 tiers, standard and AP. If a student is not ready for AP, which is college level work, then he or she is in a standard class, which means that one teacher is again instructing multiple learning levels. Is this equitable? I would argue that by limiting our high achievers to grade standard material, their growth is being suppressed. I would also argue that the same curriculum may not work for all kids, particularly kids with learning needs such as dyslexia or gifted and talented students. One size does not fit all, and we should not be limiting our kids to only 2 tracks. We can do better. I just came from the work session where the MAP results were shared, and we learned our most vulnerable kids are still the ones showing the least growth. I would like to share some slides of MCA data from the Minnesota Report Card website to compare Edina Public Schools with Minnetonka. This is a district that's outperforming us, does not use personalized learning, has similar demographics, and it's one that many Edina families have left our schools for. I'm not going to walk through every page, don't worry. But if you look at the deck, you'll see that pages 1 through 6 show overall MCA data for Edina and Minnetonka for reading, math, and science, broken out by all students, and then for students identified as receiving free and reduced lunch. As you can see, Minnetonka shows higher percentages of kids in the exceeds category and lower percentages of kids in the does not meet category across the board. Pages 7 through 14 compare the middle schools. Minnetonka continues to outperform Edina. Page 14 in particular shows that for math in grade 8 at Southview, 52.8% of the free and reduced lunch students are not proficient, and that is more than double what Valley View has. Pages 15 through 18 compares the high schools. If you note that on page 18, you'll see that more than 53% of the free and reduced students are not proficient in grade 11 math at Edina High School. And while Minnetonka's number of students who do not meet their percentage is also high at 45%, if you look at how many meet and exceed in those categories, in comparison to Edina's, they're much higher. They have 28.9% meeting versus our 13.3 and 10.5 exceeding versus 6.7%. If you'll go to page 19, which is the second to last page, I just wanted to show the difference in schedules and the amount of time spent in classes at Southview versus the Minnetonka middle schools. Valley View has a different flex advisory schedule than Southview, so more time is spent in the classroom, but still the students are not receiving as much class time as Minnetonka. With the exception of reading, which is standard and gifted, and the math options of 3 tiers, all of our other classes are standard at Southview Middle School, and I use my son's schedule as an example. Kids have no formal instruction for 56 minutes a day, 20 minutes which is in advisory, and 36 minutes which is in flex. Students in Edina spend 760 minutes in each core subject in a 20-day period. Students spend 36 minutes in each skinny elective in a 20-day period, and students who need special services for reading or math can receive up to 600 minutes of services during flex. By comparison, if you look at Minnetonka's model on the next page, you'll see that kids spend much more time in a classroom learning at their level. There are options for 3 tiers of math and 2 tiers for every other core subject. Students in Minnetonka spend 1,100 minutes in core subjects and 550 minutes in each elective in a 20-day period. Students who need special services for reading or math receive their services as an elective class during the school day and get 550 minutes in a 20-day period. While they do receive 50 minutes less over the course of the month, they still have nearly 6 hours more of actual class and instruction time for both English language arts and math versus Edina.
Ms. White, could you come to a conclusion?
Yes, okay.
You're a few minutes.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was over. So my final, just to sum up then. So is the personalized learning experiment helping our kids or hurting them? As you move forward with your strategic plan, I ask that you take time to review PL and Flex to assess what may be working and what may not. Please look at the best practices from other districts like Minnetonka's. Please commit to multiple tiers of classes so all kids can be taught in a classroom by a teacher with their peers and given the appropriate level of content and curriculum. Our students need to have options and choices. One level of class does not fit all. All of our students deserve to exceed their growth targets, and all of our children deserve a commitment to academic excellence. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, were there any other? Nope. All right. Thank you for the members of the audience that came up and spoke. Someone will be back in touch with you. We do have a number of staff recognitions tonight. The first one is for Laura Browers, who is a teacher at the Early Learning Center. This was actually an email from a staff member who said, a group of us in the Early Learning Center would like to recognize a new teacher in our group, Laura Browers. She's brought innovative, creative, effective, and engaging teaching to her classroom, students, and families. She's one of those teachers who brings light, energy, and a love for learning to all of her students. That was Laura Browers at the Early Learning Center. We have a commendation of Steve Butner and Adam Duffy. Mr. Butner is sitting over there. This is from Meta Inc. They said, we wish to express our appreciation for Steve Butner's contribution as a presenter at this year's Brainstorm 2019 event. It's not surprising that he would be speaking at a Brainstorm event. He showed a high level of professional development and great education in technology for the professionals that were there. They also wanted to note appreciation for Adam Duffy as presenter, also at Brainstorm, that Adam is listed as a true asset to the Edina Public Schools. And next we have a commendation of Jane Kretsch, who is a 5th grade teacher at Concord Elementary. There was an email from a parent who praised Ms. Kretsch's response to a child that had, I think, a medical issue in her class, and wanted to thank the teacher for her work. And those are our accommodations for tonight. And thank you to all of our teachers and staff. Next, we have our consent agenda. Are there any items to remove from the consent agenda? Otherwise, can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
And a second, please. Second. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion carried. Next, we get to reports and discussions, starting with community education program. Val, I believe you are up. And I'm guessing that all the students here are 9th grade government. If you're in the 9th grade government class, you want to raise your hand? And we're going to see you here in a year and a half to get your commendation for a perfect score? Excellent. All right, Val, you are up.
Oh, and it's green. Good evening. Members of the board, Superintendent Schultz, colleagues, and community members. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to be with so many students. But I would very quickly like to introduce you to the 4 coordinators that really articulate, create, and develop the programs and services for Edina Community Ed. 2 of them are new, so I just thought it'd be a great opportunity. Cheryl Gunnis is our Community Involvement and Adult Learning Coordinator, 2nd year. Oh, thank you. We have Leah Bird. You've had the pleasure of listening to with our Early Learning Center. She is awesome. Yeah. She and Lisa Hawthorne from Early Childhood Special Services co-coordinate that program. Two people new since March are Julie Gabrielson. Julie comes to us from the University of Minnesota. She is replacing Seth Ryan and overseeing our operations and facilities and finances for Edina Community Ed. And finally, Rachel Hicks. She comes to us from Eden Prairie Schools. She replaces Meg Barrett, who had a 35-year successful career here. And Rachel oversees all of our youth programs, K-5 primarily, with school-age care and youth. So I just would have been remiss if I did not introduce that team. So thank you. So tonight we're talking about Edina programs and services and budget and a little bit of history. Primarily, we are about shared resources, shared responsibility, and shared responsiveness. Community Ed this year is 50 years old in the state of Minnesota. In 1969, the lighted schoolhouse legislation passed, and it's been going on for 50 years. And when you think about Community Ed, what programs look like then, 20 years ago, 10, and even 5 look different. And that is because we have a commitment, and I'm not sure, thank you, thank you, sir, to community advisory councils. We believe at our core that citizens have a right and responsibility to educate all residents, birth through adult plus. By statute, we are required, and by your ruling as school board, to have a community advisory council. Also, by accepting early childhood family education levy, we're required to have an early childhood advisory council. Edina goes above and beyond by also having a youth advisory council to oversee our wide array of youth programs, and Edina Community Council, which is an outward-facing council, bringing in voices from our food shelf, from Community Action Partnership for Suburban Hennepin, from Bloomington Public Health, because we determined as a community about 15, 20 years ago that our residents needed to have information and access to resources that would support their needs. Collectively, there are about 60 residents that are involved in those community advisory councils. Alongside that, we do evaluations for our classes. We have focus groups in the different areas and ages and stages. And we've also hired 2 outreach staff that help us get into our community alongside our colleagues to make sure that we're hearing voices from those that aren't able to make meetings or traditionally have not been a part of the conversation. This is the programs and services that are currently being offered by the voices and choices of our community. Sometimes it's sort of fun and it's instructive to go back and look where you were as we move forward. As I mentioned, we started in 1969 as a state in community education services, and here in Edina, we began with adult programs and volunteer programs primarily. Volunteer programs were the curriculum resources and programs that brought expert speakers into our classrooms to enhance and support the curriculum. I'm really proud to say that we continue that effort along with a robust volunteer program that brings in individuals and students today. In 1980, it's kind of hard to imagine, but at that time, the culture in our community was shifting. Parents and females particularly began working, and we were asked by the community to start a school-age care program. At that time, it was at one elementary. 50 residents from the entire school district participated in that first year of school-age care. By then, the principals said we need it in our buildings. You fast forward between our pre-K, our K-5, and our 6 through 8 morning school-age care program, we have over 1,600 students. It's a pretty significant change in a fairly short period of time. 1981 was a large change for community education in Edina because this building was at one time the Edina East High School. In 1981, the school board then determined that we would be closing that because of an enrollment shift. We, as a community, decided not to sell that building, but to reimagine and recreate it. So a community education director was hired, and the building at that time was 25 tenants at least, was community ed staff, small, district office staff, and some adult programming. When I was hired initially, one of our former superintendents told me this was an accordion building. It was meant to be able to expand as our programs expanded, and that has certainly rung true as we now have 2 schools, our Early Learning Center and Normandale Elementary. We have reconfigured the building to have all of our district move up, and we continue to reimagine this building. That comes from the community. In 1994, as a school board, it was allowed for, the community decided to levy for early childhood family education dollars, and with that, we began to have early learning down on the first floor. 1996, in the 90s, youth development, youth service became really important in the state of Minnesota and to this community. We treasure our youth's options for spark and enrichment, as well as service learning and community service options. So we began middle school programs from community ed, and I'm proud to say that the first ever community service letter program in Minnesota was started right here in Edina. 2001, the Edina Resource Center began. We talked about that, where there was a demand for services that could meet families' needs, and now we celebrate 50 years. So how are we funded? It's sort of an interesting, unique mix, but we are one of 6, and sometimes there are more funds in Edina schools. Much like transportation or food service, we have a funding stream committed to 04. Funding mechanisms come in as a result of 17 state statutes that oversee community education services. Some of our programs receive state aid, some of them receive levy money, and one of them receives some federal dollars. Collectively, and I'll have you go to the next one, thank you. You can see that it's a fairly complex, no different than general education, really, or most other complex, but there's a variety of different ways we're funded, but collectively, the state aid levy and federal aid makes up about 10 to 15% of our $7.5 million budget. So about 85 to 90% of our fees, our budget is fee-based. We have pretty close to, between part-time and full-time, about 300 staff. And about 87% of our costs are staff, our humans, our interaction. The joy of our job is our internal and external collaborations. And our job is to support and enhance the programs of our K-12 learners, alongside with developing robust programming for our adult learners. Together, we collaborate on volunteer programs in the Edina Resource Center, on managing our facilities and overseeing the policy, and then we share expenses in some of the services that support our entire public school system. But really, the real hard work and probably the most interesting work comes in our collaborations with each and every school and each of our principals, because together, when we were making a school start time change, our staff met with our principals at elementary, at middle school, and at the high school to determine what we could do together to ensure that we could still deliver on many of the programs that are dear to our community. Annually, we're asked to do a report to Minnesota Department of Education so that collectively, statewide, we can tell a story about how many folks are impacted by community education services programming. This is 3-year-old data. At that time, there were 900,000 adults. Adult Basic Education is a consortium program we're involved with. Adults with Disabilities is another consortium, and what I mean by that, it's with Bloomington, Richfield, Eden Prairie, and Edina, that together we pool our state aid in order to create a more robust program for families in the area. 1,300,000 youth are served, and over 200,000 preschoolers. Morris Leatherman does a study on community education services impact about every 5 to 7 years. And they continue to report, this data doesn't change really, that people that are involved in community education programs in their town are more likely to rate the quality of education higher, more positive about their financial management, more positive about us as administrators, you as school board members, stronger supporters of our referendums, and most importantly, they feel better informed and connected to their community. So I'm very proud of our staff, I'm proud of our program, and I'm really thankful for the opportunity to share a little bit with you, and am available, or our staff is, if you guys have questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Here they go.
Just-
Thanks for staying, guys.
Just wait.
I know, it must be release time, right? And her computer. Was it me? I don't.
All right, Owen, you had a question?
Two things. First off, I want to fully endorse what you are doing and what all of Edina Community Action is doing. I was in Dad's ECFE for 6 years in this building, and it was fantastic for me learning how to be a dad. Most of us actually, we had a dad's class separated from the kids, and we talked about the wives 1/3 of the time, so that was good too. But it was fantastic, and it is a great use of resources, and I'm not surprised that the community reflects well on when a district does that. So, commendations. The one concern I have is I want to make sure that our community ed services does not squeeze out organic community organizations such as Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, 4-H, what have you, that are self-funded, that the large majority of its members come from the community, and that we more than just tolerate these groups, that we embrace them too, because they're part of the collective resources for emotional resiliency for our children. So we've talked about this in the policy committee meetings before, so I just want the public to know that we have this discussion as well, too. So. But again, Val, you run a fantastic program, and just keep going at it. Thank you.
I'll just really quickly just say just one thing. As we've gone through this construction cycle, and as we've almost doubled our square footage, to truly appreciate the time we have needed to look at what district policies are all over our metro area to help us figure out. And we'll be coming forward, as you and I have talked, with some adaptation suggestions to policy. But all along, as we've grown, we've kind of held hands with our new activity center and some of the other new spaces to say, let's taste them, try them, let's see how they are operating, what the needs are, and then let's adapt them. But thank you.
Good. Other questions? Great, thanks, Val.
You guys are an easy group, thank you.
Yeah? All right, next is the Science and Engineering Curriculum Study Review. Randy, you're here to bring us up to date. Oh, and Isabel.
Good evening, Chair Wallen-Friedman, Superintendent Schultz, our board and community members. I'm joined here by Isa Punchard, who's our elementary curriculum specialist, and my name's Randy Smossel, Director of Teaching and Learning. We are about to head into the science and engineering study, and the state of Minnesota publishes a schedule of different curricular areas, when different curricular areas are to be reviewed inside of school districts. And so Edina Public Schools has aligned to that schedule. And so it is our time to begin the process of looking at science and engineering across our school district K-12.
So,
The draft.
did you say that the state looks at the standards across the entire state of Minnesota and what the schools will have to implement?
Right, so what I'm saying is that there's a cycle for different
Right.
content areas, and so science and engineering is up for review, and so we've aligned to that, so it's our time to start the science and engineering review. As a former science teacher, still a science teacher, Mr. Schultz, Amir, we are very excited for this review in Edina, and I haven't had an opportunity to be able to do this since I've arrived in Edina, and so we're very excited headed into this for next year. I'm going to take us through just a couple of slides, and then Isa's going to join us here in just a few. So what do? We start off with a design team of teachers, and we have representation from each of the schools, courses, different programs. And that design team of teachers then lays out some of the steps in the process. Now, we have a generic process that we use inside of our teaching and learning department, and then we adapt it to each of the departments as they undergo these reviews. So through this curricular revision process, the design team is going to look at the standards that came out from the state and how we're going to align our instruction to that. They're going to look at new materials and resources and what we might need to teach those new standards, and then they'll help determine the professional learning needs of our staff, among a number of other tasks. But if you had to pick out three of the big ones, those would be three of the big ones. What we will do is we're going to begin this data collection process, and we're actually going to begin this spring. And part of the data collection is looking at our assessment data, looking at tests, how students have performed across the school district, from MCAs to AP to ACT. We'll also do surveys, and we'll look at survey responses from the experience and from the perception side, and then we're going to do focus groups in particular with parents to gather more insightful and specific information about the experience that their child has had in Edina. What the design team will do then is they will begin to work with this plan of implementing these new science standards in kind of a multi-phase, multi-year approach. And so we'll have kind of the round one of professional development with the first cohort, the design team members and other teachers that will begin to implement these standards. The following year, we'll have that second cohort group that will begin that implementation. Now, the strategy behind that is that we're growing capacity as a district to implement well. And so the first cohort will collect data around that implementation and look at what has worked well and what hasn't so that we can build the capacity to train everybody across the district. What we're really trying to do is to build that capacity in each of the buildings first to some level before we roll it out across all of the buildings. So by 21-22, we have our second group, our full implementation started. We'll continue professional development through that time and continue to collect data on how that implementation is going in terms of feedback from the teachers. And then the expectation from the state of Minnesota is that by the spring of 2023, our district will be prepared. We'll have prepared students for the new Science MCA, which will be launched that first year. So on the design team across K-5, what we try to do is get representation from each of the buildings, and we try to get representation at the secondary level across the different disciplines. And this is really, this part of the work is really teacher work because they're trying to unpack the standards. They're trying to look at how the standards align for particular courses and then map that out. And then we pull in different levels of expertise depending upon where they're at. It might be media specialists, it might be EL, gifted, SPED, it might be community education along that journey. So I'm going to turn over to Isa to talk a little bit about the content of those new science standards and what that looks like.
Thanks. So what I'd like to talk about is what has changed and what has not changed in these new standards. We know that we have some legislative requirements that the State Department has to abide by, and here's the first few of these. I think noteworthy are the K-8 benchmarks are grade specific, whereas by grade 9, 9, 12, the standards are banded to allow for more flexibility of courses. Another element in these requirements, they must include the contributions of Minnesota Native American nations, so Dakota and Ojibwe for us. And we also want to make sure that they include the ISTE standards. So ISTE, as you see here, is the International Society for Technology and Education, and you will see these reflected in some of the practices that the standards are organized around. So the major shift, I think, for all of us as teachers is going to be the fact that students now are not just expected to learn scientific facts, but they're expected to explain phenomena. And a phenomena is defined as any event or activities for which we need a scientific explanation. And an example that we actually did at one of our very first workshops at the State Department of Education was, here are 3 Petri dishes with M&Ms in them. One is cold water, one is room temperature water, and one is hot water. Now, tell us what's happening, you know. Or in the case of the one on this slide would be something like mountains. Why are some mountains really sharp, really tall? Why do we have mountains that are softer and more shorter as well? So kids are supposed to just figure out everything that they know and try to explain this with models and things like that. That's the phenomena, instead of just learning about molecules or learning about erosion. You have to be able to explain it. So the new standards were based on 2 major publications, and you see them on the bottom here. In 2011 was the framework for K-12 science standards. That gave us then the national next generation science standards that we refer to as the NGSS. And what these standards, how they're different is they reflect an interconnectedness between 3 dimensions that you see in that little rope icon. And I'm going to go into details on these. So you have practices, you have core concept, core ideas, and I can't even read this. Cross-cutting concepts, thank you. So far, there are about 20 states that have adopted the next generation standards as is, and about the same amount of states that are adapted them. And Minnesota is adapting them. One of the differences, for example, would be that in the NGSS, the engineering standards are separate and they're not grade specific, whereas in Minnesota, they've been embedded in the standards for the grade levels. So the practices are really how the standards are organized. There's 8 of them, and you'll see the different colors meaning different things. The ones that are in blue are ones that currently we're doing very well in our standards. They're pretty well aligned with what we're currently doing. The ones that are in blue, I mean in green, are the ones that are new, and I'm going to explain those a little bit more in detail in just a second. And then the red ones are the connections that we have with the English language arts standards. And by the way, when we're looking at building survey tools to figure out how we're doing currently with our curriculum relative to what's coming, we're going to organize these questions around these practices as well to see where we have gaps and where we don't. So for example, with the models, this is what I meant when I talked about those M&Ms. So if I gave you the 3 Petri dishes, and then I give you a chart paper and some crayon markers, and I'd say, okay, draw a model for what you think is happening. And you'd have different answers, different levels of sophistication of answers, but that's really going beyond describing what is happening to then telling us why you think it's happening. The mathematical and computational thinking is also a new area. And For example, it starts at the elementary level where students are going to be including in their explanations bar graphs or pie charts, going more in depth as the years go to computational thinking in high school could include computer simulations. So it's really increasing that level of mathematical thinking in the sciences. And then the last one that was highlighted in red on the other slide is really about communication. So how do we make sure that students can understand scientific text? How do we make sure that they can write scientific reports? And we have a unique opportunity with these practices to really do interdisciplinary work with English language arts colleagues. For example, at the elementary level, in both our reading and our writing program, there are units about expository nonfiction, where students are taught how to interpret what a scientific text would look like. What are the text features of a scientific text? And they're also taught how to write. How do you write a report on the subject that you have researched? And then at the secondary level, science teachers also have English language arts standards that are assigned to teachers of scientific history and scientific content areas as well. So the cross-cutting concepts are going to be those, what connects the various disciplines together. Because whether you're looking at earth science or physics or life science, you're going to have things like cause and effect. You're going to have patterns. You see the different sizes reflecting the number of benchmarks that are associated with these particular concepts. So many more benchmarks are going to be looking at cause and effect as opposed to the idea of scale, for example. And then the last element of the 3 dimensions is the core ideas. The core ideas help students understand how the content is applied to real life. And for example, in the past, we may have learned facts or details about some of these, but now the facts and details become more evidence, but they're not the sole focus of instruction. So most of these are new. Some of the ones that you'll see, it's kind of hard to see, but that PS4, which talks about waves and their applications in technologies, goes all the way into looking at what is an MRI. What does it do? How do the concept of waves, how does that apply to that kind of technology, and why is it important to know that? So when you think back about those ISTE technology kinds of standards, you're going to see that some of those are going to be in these core ideas. Anything else you wanted to add on this? Okay. So that's kind of what I have right now for the organization of the standards, and I'm wondering if you have any questions.
A couple things. You're talking about, we're not just going to be about facts, it's phenomenon. Mm-hmm. And how are we doing that right now, or how is that going to be different? Because I would assume that we're already talking about scientific phenomena past facts.
I think what's different is the way that the instruction is going to be organized. So instead of focusing mainly on facts, which I think is what we've done a lot of in elementary science for sure, I can't speak as well to the secondary science. Now it's going to be the phenomena becomes what you're studying, not the individual facts, because phenomena is so complex. So that instead of saying, we're going to study these facts in isolation, and then at some point you're going to put everything together in a real life phenomenon. Now it's almost flipped on its head, where the phenomena becomes the driving force for the unit. Here's our overarching question. So if the essential question of the unit will be more around that phenomenon, now what do we need to learn in order to figure this out?
Mm-hmm. So it's the organizing principle.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And you're talking about computational thinking, and there may be computer simulations as the students get older. will we need to get new equipment to accommodate this? Or are we going to do timeshares on mainframes, or how's that going to work?
I think it's a little early to say because we first have to see what the final standards, the final draft of the standard is going to contain. And then that will be the work of the design team as they look at where are our gaps. Do we have what we need, or do we need to make recommendations for materials, or maybe it's just software? We'll see.
And right now, the draft of the standards is sitting in the legislature on the second draft and will be voted on in May. And so once those go into statute, then we'll have kind of our final set of standards to work from.
And what did you mean by Native American? How is that going to be integrated in?
So by law, every content area that when they revise their standards has to include the contributions of Minnesota Native Americans to that field of study. One example, for example, in third grade, we have even currently a unit called Sun, Moon, and Stars. And one of the things that we look at is how did Native Americans use the stars to predict seasons and what was, moving camps, things like that. So that's one of the connection that's kind of easy to make at this point. But if in the final draft of the standard, what we hope to have is some suggestions, because sometimes the state will give you a benchmark and then some suggestion ideas for this could be, and that's usually where they put their suggestions for how to address the Minnesota Native American contributions.
Okay, thank you.
Do you anticipate this curriculum to have more intense and more teacher training needs than other curriculum rollouts? Because it sounds fairly sophisticated. And then I guess in addition to that, do you anticipate it potentially needing cross-functional training? Because it looks like it could or would involve language arts and math. So and you might not be able to answer that right now, I realize, because we're early in the phase, but I'm trying to understand if you think this would be.
So we're definitely thinking there's going to be a high need for professional learning, which is why in our timeline you see that before an implementation, after an implementation, and then that continuous improvement that you keep doing long after the first year is over is really about that as well. At the elementary level, I think the connection between the language arts and the science is going to be much easier because teachers teach those content areas anyway. And at the secondary level, we'll have to see how we can figure that out. That is one of the things the design team is going to look at, is what are the professional learning needs. Yeah.
So I just a couple questions. One is how is this going to connect with Project Lead the Way? Are you reviewing Project Lead the Way at the same time? And then another question on that is a lot of coding questions. Schools are now implementing coding from kindergarten throughout the school years, and I'm just wondering how this might be impacted and whether or not, just on those two. Thanks.
Yeah, we see, because there are also engineering standards under the science standards umbrella, that it's really an opportunity to look at science and engineering K-12. And so looking at what those specific engineering standards look like at the elementary level will be important. And then looking at the kind of scope and sequence of what we do in terms of engineering offerings, 612 will also be part of this review. So we do have teachers that we've contacted already that teach those engineering courses, and particularly at the secondary level. And so we will look at the course sequences, we'll look at coding, we'll look at gaps, we'll look at some of the new and emerging trends in engineering, and look at our overall course sequence as part of this review.
Could you speak a little bit about how the new accelerated science course at the middle school is going to be impacted by this?
Well, these standards certainly will drive the content and the design inside of the class. We do have a bit of a timeline that we're working around because we will be launching in the fall, and so our teachers will be doing a lot of work later this spring and over the summer. We do have a date set in May to begin more of that curricular unpacking and repackaging work. But we really are a bit stuck until the state finalizes those standards because we don't want to invest a lot of time into it until we're in that final draft. But these new standards will be embedded in that accelerated course.
And then I'm curious as to what types of programs you're looking for in terms of high school and whether or not you've talked with business, like how are you going to be engaging businesses and other people in this process?
It's a great question. We do have a STEM advisory group that meets once a month, and part of the conversations we have had is how do we partner with our community around this opportunity that is science and engineering sitting in front of us, and what kinds of things might we want to do differently moving forward. So that is a great group to take questions like that too, about how can we partner together to enhance the experience for kids and enhance the training and learning opportunities for our adults. So we're going to try to leverage that group.
Randy, one of the questions I had, and I don't think we covered this in teaching and learning, but we maybe just touched on it, is the fact that we have the flexibility in 9-12 to place the various subject at the grades that we feel they best fit within our own district. And I'm wondering if this is the time that you guys may take a look at that and essentially, I don't know, verify or confirm that you feel that we are on the right path, or maybe we want to move some things. I know there's been talk before about physics being in 9th grade, and for some kiddos, it may not be math-wise appropriate for them. And so I'm wondering if this is a time that we would discuss that when we're looking at this type of change in curriculum.
Yeah, it's a great question. We'll absolutely look at the course sequence and what the scope and sequence of that curriculum at the secondary level looks like. One of the interesting things that the committee has done at the state level is they've really put a greater emphasis on earth science than in the past, and so we'll have to look at how does that fit in with what we've been doing, where are the gaps, and where might we need to change. So we will bring forward to the board recommendations about what we see needing to happen to implement these new standards and what that might mean for program changes. I don't know what those are right now, of course, but we will be taking a look at that.
Something we would consider while doing this work.
Yeah, we will definitely look at our scope and
Excellent, thank
sequence
you.
of courses. Yep.
Great. Any other questions? Amir?
Yeah. My biggest concern gets to an overarching concern about how Edina sets expectations, high expectations, and expectations based off of where students are and trying to grow them, not based off of some national typical student, but based off of where this student has been, where this student's trying to go. And some of that would be here and some of it wouldn't. And so I want to emphasize the difference between our expectations for our standards and how we run our courses and what the state's coming up with. And of course, the state gives us guidance and we comply, but you would agree that this isn't curriculum. And so what we're offering students, what we're expecting, still needs to meet our expectations and our understandings of what's a good idea and what's not. Because some of the things in here might not be a good idea, and we shouldn't just quit doing what we think is best for students because something was approved that isn't even holistically binding. So I want to be very clear when you're looking at this that we are not to tell people that everything you're doing needs to stop and comply with this, even in spirit. That we need to have our own idea of how we teach science and standards, and it needs to comply with this state law, but not act like this is curriculum. And some of it is just almost incoherent. You know, they have 8 excellent practices. I just love the practices. But Minnesota, as you say, one of the states that's adapting them to what's already in law, they're really messing this up, in my opinion, in some places. For example, the Native American reference. There is a law that says when the commissioner is going through these reviews, you must include contributions of Native American communities as related to the academic standards. It's a relatively mild requirement, and yet it's everywhere in this document in places that doesn't make any sense to me, and I would hate for us to bend over backwards to follow that. For example, one of the practices, constructing explanations and designing solutions. You read a little bit right, and it says, well, what you need to do is be able to apply historical examples from Minnesota Native American communities about their knowledge systems and how they did it. That's not a social studies class. We're not here in science class to study how one particular group did things. That's a social studies thing. This is science, and it needs to be about the contributions to the scientifically accepted understandings. And you can, of course, make things interesting and show differences. And we often show how things have changed over time, and there's a key science lesson there. But that's very different from teaching a particular group's history as science. It almost reminds me of intelligent design, right? We're warping the science to what a group had, and it really worries me, and it's all over this document. It only came out in draft 2, it wasn't in draft 1. And if we can't stop it from getting approved that way, we need to be wary of how much of this we bring in. Likewise, it says, under this constructing explanations, well, you need to gather information about present historical technologies used by various human groups, including the Native Americans, about ways that they've changed, or they've had inheritance and desired traits in organisms change. They're really starting to talk about natural selection. And yet they've honed in on how natural selection has impacted Native Americans in Minnesota. It's just bizarre that they're going there when the law says recognize contributions as related to the standards. So this whole document, aside from the 8 practices, kind of worries me. And I would hate to see us wreck an ideal science education in compliance with what a committee is coming up with and proposing to the legislature. And I'd put that under the banner of our standards, of course, comply with state standards, but they need to be what we think is best for kids based off of a curriculum we think is best for kids.
So I think one of the things when you read the benchmarks, they are general statements of learning, what we want kids to learn and be able to do. And I believe, because I'm not sure what document you're reading right now, if you're reading draft 2 of the standards, so you'll see a difference in the way the benchmark is written as opposed to the italics that follow, which are the, for example, it could mean this, that, or the other. And I think that's where you're going to see the Native American connections that the State Department has provided so that school districts may choose to use them. So they will tell you that what is in italics is an example. It doesn't mean you have to do all of this. Just like when we had examples in the English language arts standards of names of texts, it did mean we had to read those texts. It was just
yeah, well, I appreciate that. I'm not referring to italics. I just want to be clear, not italics.
Okay.
You were looking at the new second draft, correct?
Right, and I don't mean to put that all on you,
Amir?
because that's right. The newest draft, not italics, I don't mean to put that all on you, because it's a state level initiative. So what I would hope to see from our district is complying with this, taking the part that we appreciate having some reprieve, because the old standards were so extensive that they didn't leave a lot of room for radical departures. And I think this allows a lot more flexibility, the study of phenomena. I would hate to see facts become a dirty word. So when I hear people talk about this, they say, well, right now students learn a lot of facts. That's got to stop. That has no place in science, which of course is not what you're saying. I'm being a little exaggerating here. But studying questions open-ended is marvelous, and hopefully we can do a much better job of getting kids to like science and get them to actually be curious. But the foundations of facts have to be there for people to be creative, for people to build an explanation. And so I would hate to see any guidance to teachers that says that, if you're giving too many facts a day, you're not a good science teacher anymore, that you're doing it the old way. And instead, maybe try to bring it back, bring it to student interest, bring it to something that's interesting, make relevant connections to modern technology, modern medical solutions. There are all sorts of ways and we can have more extensive time having students try to develop these ideas and debate them. And I think that's what these standards are getting at. And that's a beautiful thing. But it does need to be grounded in facts. And if you start doing a word search for various words and benchmarks that were in the old standards for ones that are in the new, they're just not there because the emphasis is on discovery a lot of the time. But those facts still need to be presented. We still need students being prepared for high school level AP exams, for college level science classes. And of course, there's always a risk and phenomena that you bite off more than you can chew. And the thing you wonder about has an explanation that starts years earlier. And I would hope that the education we offer started years earlier too.
I think the phenomenon offers context and opportunity to learn the vocabulary. And so I think they want to make sure that that information has an anchor. You know, it has an experience to anchor, because we know that when kids have experiences, they can anchor that vocabulary to it. So it's a stronger way to approach it from a pedagogical standpoint. So I hope we're not giving the impression that those kinds of things aren't important, or vocabulary isn't important and skills aren't important. They certainly are. It's just how you get to them that's really important.
I just want to point out that Amir is a current high school physics teacher. I know, but your wealth of knowledge is well exemplified this evening.
All right. Any other questions? Great. Thank you for the update.
Thank you.
Next, we shift to policy review. Amir, you want to walk us through? Some of these look pretty...
Absolutely. We've got several up for discussion. Two of them are, let's see, 507 about corporal punishment and 508 about the extended school year for certain students. They were up for review, no changes proposed. Extended school year for certain students, what that means is if in accordance with a student's IEP, we have come to an understanding that the regular school year doesn't meet the needs of that student, and in order to provide them, which they're legally entitled to have, a free, appropriate public education, they need to continue to meet in times when other students aren't here, that can be worked out. Likewise, corporal punishment, rather straight to the point, it's not okay anytime in public schools. Policy 538 has a long history here. We had a work session on it, a lot of concerns. This is about student travel, field trips really, as a lot of people are familiar with the term. And there were a lot of concerns that came up. Some had to do with safety, some with liability, some with cost and the equity around that, some with just the wisdom of certain endeavors and staff time that went around it. And what you see before you is the result of that talk and a search for consensus and a search for rallying, I guess, more people to consider certain concerns. The biggest change that came out of those conversations is a phrase that's in the policy section that says in response to a concern, let's see, in the interest of providing lower cost opportunities for students, a regional or national travel study experience with similar educational objectives will be offered to students in the prior, same, or following school year as an international trip. And what's built in there is that these international trips tend to be, of course, the more expensive ones, less access. The original wording actually from our high school principal even suggested putting it in the same year, and we backed off on the policy committee and made it prior, same, or following to try to target the same cohort of students without being too restrictive. And we added language about similar educational objectives to get at the question of what international trip prompts what more affordable regional or national trip. Is it like the band, or is it something that's about a certain study? So we're trying to have language there that captures our intent of a rotation of affordability for similar types of trips. A mandatory rotation with this flexibility here. So it's not exactly a one-to-one in the same year or something like that, but this is our compromise language. You also notice a lot of the language in this policy is in the appendix that came up in our work session. It didn't get resolved there. If you have concerns about certain points that are in the appendix that you think should be in the policy, we listened to that. I'd say the background is we didn't want to move the whole Appendix 1 up into policy. We didn't want to start breaking apart a logical flow. And we didn't have a strong concern that if something was in the appendix where the board tends not to have to, or does not in our operation have to approve a change before it's made, that a change would be made that the board would be discouraged about. Also, we have a standing tradition here of the administration notifying the board when an appendix change is made at the next board meeting, so that that sort of thing would come to the attention of a board, just not seeking approval. So that's the background on 538. I think I'll pause there, look for feedback.
There are questions? Sarah?
I know I had brought up appendices versus actual policy. And, you know, an example this evening in our information portion of the policy, changes have been made to Appendix 2, and it's simply under information. So I guess, you know, when we're, you know, one of the things we are supposed to be is a governance and policy board. And so it does concern me, and not just this policy, I think policy overall, that we have a coherent thought around what we believe is best to be in policy versus in appendices, because that is supposed to be one of our core functions. We are a policy-making board. And, you know, even when I look at MSBA and their guidelines and their guideline handbook about, you know, why do school boards write policy? And it is to create, you know, guidance and continuity and all of the other reasons that they list. So I question why we took a policy that was very engaged and had most of the language in the policy and moved it all to appendices. So I would advise that we reconsider that move and put things back into the actual policy. I do appreciate the work on the language around trying to have opportunities for students that are not just international. I do know that, at least from my own kids' experience, the bands will rotate a bus trip, as I think I would call it, versus a domestic plane trip versus the international trip. Yeah, passport needed. So I appreciate that we're trying to take a look at that for our kids, because I think opportunity is definitely one of the things we were concerned about in terms of socioeconomic. But my key point tonight, though, was to just say, I do think we need to think about our responsibility as a policymaking board. And it's not just this policy, but I think we need to think about it broadly. Thank you.
So is the question on policies that the policy should set up the general rule versus the process of how to accomplish that rule would be in the appendix? Is that one way to look at it?
Yeah, I guess outside of your paradigm, though, is say if there's a constraint or if there's a requirement, and then the board has consensus around that, is it fine if it stays in the appendix and it's adhered to? Or should it be in policy to communicate that that came from the board? Is there any value to that, any difference? And some of these things are procedures, and typically procedures are clearly in the appendix. But if a procedure is trying to get at a board concern, I don't know that we're going to get a clear algorithm that helps us sort this sort of work, which is one of the reasons that a lot of it stayed in the appendix.
But why did we move, when you brought us this policy a month or so ago, why had we moved everything out of policy into appendices?
So a couple of reasons. One is a lot of the changes were, it was significant, the overhaul to the structure and the format, so there was a big change anyway. And there was a time we consulted with district council, and his advice generally was keep your policy slim. But when he was telling that to us, he wasn't necessarily tracking that we have a system of sort of saying board work, admin work, board work, management work, which doesn't quite fit the idea of a policy being slim. But at that point, it was already a coherency to how the appendices were laid out, and that's partially why it looks like it does today.
Right, so, because unless I'm wrong, we've always been told that policy-wise, that appendices can be actionable by administration without board approval. And unless that has changed, that is my concern for so much being in appendices.
Sorry, Erik. Oh, that's okay. So one question I have, which doesn't totally answer your point, but if you look at the last part of the policy, D, it says employees may not enter into contracts or agreements with commercial agencies without formal district approval. It says, as such, all travel experiences must meet expectations as outlined in this policy. And my question was, I'm sorry, 4D under guidelines. So my question was, because so much from a expectation perspective did get moved to the appendix portion, does it make sense to put in the policy that all travel experiences must meet expectations as outlined in this policy and appendices? And so as part of our policy, we're telling people they have to meet all the information that's in the appendix, because there really aren't clear expectations outlined in the policy. They're all outlined in the appendix. Does that make sense? And so I think if we, as a board, say that people have to meet the expectations in the appendix, it still gives us some control without moving everything into the policy. But if we're not going to say that, I don't know why we even have that sentence, because there really isn't anything other than laying out the mileage that really is controlling anything in the policy. Does that make sense?
And I guess I would add that not all of this is just procedural stuff. I mean, we talk about bus times and, you know, if kids are going to be home later than a certain time, there's rules in this appendices. So to me, it's not really just procedure.
Right, and many other districts call those appendices regulations, and that actually may be more clarifying. I've wondered if we need to shift from calling them appendices if we are in the process, and it seems as if administration is really coming to the policy committee saying we'd like to do a slight rethinking of how we handle policy, and shift it to being a little bit more skinny, is what I guess. And then, but then we'd need to really maybe we need to clarify that they should be called regulations instead of appendix.
And is that
or is that any worse? I mean, if it's an appendix, it would be similarly attached to a policy. I don't know.
I guess I don't understand enough about why we would be making policy skinnier based on what you just said. So I think that would require a full board discussion if we're going to change our policy practices.
I'd just add, I think there's some reading into the word policy. So we have been making a distinction about what's in the top document versus an appendix. And then as the sentence you read indicated that people need to comply with the policy. And in that sense, it's a holistic word. It's including the appendices. I don't know if you're worried that it's not clear to the reader, or if you're trying to find a compromise for this table. And I just want to clarify, the appendices are not optional. There's nobody who can choose to not comply with any of the words that's written there, except John, as he at the top of the management decides to change a procedure, in which case it goes to the board. It's nothing secret about it. It comes to the board in a notification, and if it disturbs enough people on the board, there could be board action at that point, or it could go to a committee. There's all sorts of routes. It could be a conversation. There are all sorts of routes to respond. I feel like we've got ourselves a little, I don't want to say stuck because I don't want to dismiss the concern, but we've got ourselves talking about a concern in the abstract without any actual problem or something that's gone wrong that we can point to.
A simple question? If it's in the appendix rather than the policy, does it carry less weight?
It carries no less weight. The only concern is who could modify it. Is it only board approval, or is it superintendent with board oversight?
Okay. So if it carries equal weight, we did this in the work session for a good 45 minutes as well, that perhaps we just follow through with what the policy committee recommends for now and revisit it in a work session. No, I'm not calling for additional work session on this topic. I'm saying that I think that an appendix is never going to clarify every instance of what a policy is intended to meet, and there needs to be a certain amount of latitude given to people that are running the school. So I think that the policies feel relatively clear, and we should debate those and appendices or practices from an operational perspective, and that we're not all agreeing on that. But I've listened to this twice now for almost an hour, and I'm trying to figure out what we're doing.
So I have a different question. So you talked about the lower cost option being made available. You said the principal had recommended in the same year, and the committee elected on prior, same, or following. Did you discuss that sub C being offering students in the same cohort, prior, same, or next? In other words, right now, if you have a 10th grade class that has an option, then the next year, under this policy, that 10th grade class could have a different option, but you've now missed a year. So in other words, did you talk about it applying to a cohort?
Only to the extent that that's a consequence that might happen. We did mention that. We did not write a policy that said every student has a choice between international and regional for every learning objective. That's very constricting, and we decided not to. And we said, and I think, Sarah, you've mentioned this before, that the rotation idea is already resulting in some students having a chance to travel and some not. And the orchestra and the band is the key example people go to. And you know what you're getting into with those organizations early because they have a reliable cycle. But nonetheless, no one's promised that every student travel opportunity for every learning objective will get a choice for every student. And we started to get towards that promise with the constraints we put on, that within a 3-year time period, there'll be a trip that's not requiring a passport for similar learning objectives for one that was. We're getting to that, but we didn't go, I'd say, so tight as to come up with your proposal. In fact, we actively acknowledged that there will be students who don't have a choice for one grade for one learning objective.
So under this one, so if there's a science trip to Borneo, then sometime either the year before or the year after, there has to be a similar science trip that meets the same educational objectives, but not necessarily for the class that went to Borneo.
Exactly.
Okay. I mean, from my perspective, this is an improvement. I guess I would kind of look at saying, okay, let's see how this works in practice before we start to wordsmith it to death.
Yeah, and the concern is, you know, for people who are looking forward to that junior year trip, that would always, the science trip that seems to always come up, an international science trip that would be every year, and then they'd say, now we are not going to be able to do that. So we have to, as a group, realize that this might have that type of dampening of offerings for international travel.
Might also open up travel to students that don't currently have it.
It does.
So it's a balance.
It's a balance, but it is, I mean, that's what's going to happen. I mean, what is the effect of this? There's going to be either more or less travel, and your guess is as good as mine, but I'm trying to think of what opportunities, what are the trips that I know of that are going to be impacted by this? And the only one that comes to mind right away is the science trips.
And so what would the effective date of this be? So let's say someone is, if we approve this next month, and someone is currently in the process of scheduling a trip, so do we grandfather in trips that are currently in a certain stage? Have we thought about that?
Wouldn't they be grandfathered into the old policy if they're already in process?
Right, well, they would get approved, but then are they now required to come up with a lower cost opportunity that's national, or are they exempt from sub C, and that it's anything that comes up in the after, anything that's proposed after this? In other words, there has to be an effective date.
And then the other question is, like, for foreign exchange trips to Korea, what does this do with that?
You're probably going to have to analyze them on a one-by-one basis, would be my guess, because I'm not sure it's as simple as a broad brush stroke across all.
So I do think we should just figure out when it's effective and to what, just so that we don't get kind of in between if this is approved where somebody goes, you didn't do such and such. That's all. Yeah. And then in the appendices, there are some questions or comments along the side. Are you looking for answers to those?
I think it's more transparency about the discussion, and if there's somebody who wants to add their opinion to those, you're welcome to do that.
So if the board stays silent, then we stay with the language that's within, this is F. I don't remember what Roman numeral it is, but F.
Right, the question is, should homestays be only allowed for international travel?
So the background on that, well, I just want to just briefly,
go
sorry.
ahead.
We haven't had homestays nationally. We talked about whether we should specifically prohibit them and decided not to at this point. And if for some reason somebody finds a proposal that includes that, cross that bridge when we get there, is where the committee left it. But those comments are still there for transparency for the board to.
Okay.
Can I make a request? Because I enjoyed the comments on the side. It's very helpful. And I actually really appreciated your email that you sent to the board with just some background notes. But it would be really nice when we look at policy, if whatever was changing from the previous version, that it's somehow in a different color, underlined something. Because as a board, I think you do that in committee, but it really would be nice as a board member to see that as well. So we don't have to sit and go back and forth between two policies on a regular basis to try to figure out what the changes are.
I think normally it's in there, just this policy was.
Yeah, it sounds like excuses, but this policy was so extensive.
Right.
The next policy is new, the two before it had no change, and so there's no color in the discussion line.
Right. No, I think that typically changes have been highlighted.
And they are on the action side today. But I see your points there. I think the question is what to do when the changes are so extensive, and I think, Len, you've had the opposite comment of there's so much here, so much crossed out,
Right.
so much moved around, it's not clean.
Right, just give me the executive summary that tells me.
I just want to acknowledge both comments. Yeah. All right. Well, one more for discussion. I don't know how brief this one is, but service animals in school, this is not the police canine one. This is about Americans with Disability Act compliance. This has gone through legal counsel. This has had input from some expertise as well at the Public Policy Committee. It's fairly wordsmithed at this point. I will say there are a couple of points where you'll see we're requesting something without mandating it. We'll say people are requested to provide because there are limitations as to what you can require. The federal law lists specific things that you may ask an animal to be removed from grounds for. And some ideas, even simple ideas like evidence that the animal is vaccinated in compliance with local laws, any evidence of training, those are things you may politely request, but you can't stand on your policy and say that we demand it, you must comply. So some of those are in here to try to help our system run smoothly, but we also are complying with federal law.
I have a question. I realize that it says in here that fear of animals and allergies are not a reason not to allow service animals.
That's exactly why.
Yes, which I totally agree with. However, my question is, from a procedural perspective, will parents and families be notified if a service animal is going to be in a classroom to balance because there are families that do have allergies. So not that we should not allow the service animal, but so parents can be notified in case there is a severe allergy, that the school can accommodate that prior to school starting or something like that.
I don't know, John, I'd ask your thoughts on that, on notifying, say, a class about an incoming service animal for the sake of consideration of fear or allergies, even though it's not the kind of thing that you can veto a service animal for.
Because we do the opposite and we notify about allergies, like don't bring peanuts into the classroom and stuff like that. I didn't know in a situation like this if we would also notify families in case there is an allergy to the animal. And my second question is, and this, I know there have been, is there a limitation to the types of animals that are considered service animals? Because
Yes.
it's not specified in
It is
here?
specified in
Oh,
here.
it is?
Yeah,
I
may I
didn't see-
read
I'm
it?
sorry,
And
I
I don't mean this in a mean way.
apologize.
May I read it to you? Service animal
apologize.
means any dog or in some,
Oh.
in specific circumstances, a
Okay.
miniature horse.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that. I saw that peacock on the United Airlines, and I just wanted, okay, thank you.
We have
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Their side is, we didn't mention transportation, whether or not it would be, I mean, I'm assuming we would be able to take them on buses.
I think it would be required. Thank you.
I would just say one final point, although we may have discussed this a lot around the appendices, I think maybe some clarification is helpful then. Because past practice has been, and we have been reminded many times, that appendices are not in full control of the board. So I think part of that is part of the holdup, particularly for me. I want to understand what that means. And so if you're talking different language, I can't remember what you called it, guidelines or something, Ellen, regulations, then we need to discuss that. But I think it behooves clarity.
I will say that sometimes when there's a change in how we're doing policies, that as policies come up, every single one is scrubbed to comply with the new lens, and that's not the case here with this discussion. So most policies, that's not a lens we're looking at to move things around and to make the policy skinny. It's kind of an explanation as to why 538 looks like it does with this background with discussion we've been having.
All right, any other questions on the policies? All right, we're actually going to take a 5-minute recess now. We've been going for about 3.5 hours. We had a work session before this, and then we will come back in 5 minutes. Thank you. All right, we are back from our recess. Thank you, everybody. We are moving on to action items. And before we get to action items, you thought you were ready. So we have one of the action items, which is the purchase of Chromebooks, which, can I get a motion to table that till next month? It is actually not ready yet.
So moved.
Second.
Are there any questions about it? Simply, it just isn't ready. Okay, all those in favor of tabling the purchase of Chromebooks to next month, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried. And now, see, we already got rid of one of the items on the action. Long-term facilities maintenance bond issues. Can I get a motion to ratify the award of the sale, prescribing the form and details, and providing for the payment of $24 million plus in general obligations bonds?
So moved.
Second.
All right, now you're up, Margot.
Good evening, Board. Superintendent Schultz. We started this conversation actually last November. Wow, these new microphones are really loud. Last November in Finance and Facilities, you as a board in December approved the updated 10-year long-term facility maintenance plan, revising the overall, the Edina Community Center projects, instead of a 4-year period in about a 2.5-year period, but yet keeping the tax rate the same. Jody and team were critical in helping us make sure that we were still able to do that. And then in March, you approved a resolution giving Ehlers and Associates, Jody Zespa and team, and Matt and myself the authority to approve on April 10th, last Wednesday, bonds if they came in within the certain parameters that you as a board approved. And so we did that and are happy to report the results came in very good. And with that, I'll let you give all the good news. How's that? Answer any questions you have.
Great. We have lots of good news to share tonight. So on the inside front cover of our report, you'll see a summary of the results of the sale, which was last Wednesday. And you'll see that the rating that was assigned, again, the rating agency Moody's affirmed your AAA, which is the highest rating that they will give to any school district. You are one of only 3 school districts in the entire state that have their highest rating. So I want to let you know that Margot did a really excellent job of representing your school district, answered all the questions that they had, provided lots of additional information. So she was key to making sure that you maintained that high AAA rating, and we were really excited to see that affirmed. We did also have the... That's not necessary. Yes. Thank you. Well deserved. So
It's a team effort.
it was, but you were key to it. So, yes. So, and then the Minnesota State Credit Enhancement Rating is also assigned. It gives additional insurance to the investors in the bonds. So that was also applied. And then the number of bids we received, 10 bids. So we like to see at least 3 bids. 10 bids was remarkable. We thought early that morning we had 8 signed up. We were just excited about that, and we ended up receiving 10 bids. So you'll see the low bid at 2.7680, and the high bid was 2.89. In the notes at the bottom of the page, you'll see that we had been estimating 3.27 when we met with you on March 11th. So we had a little cushion built in that, but rates actually came down. So as a result of that nice low rate that you received, there will be, payments will be $1.2 million less over the life of the issue. So it makes a huge difference. And again, thanks to Margot for being willing to allow us to follow this schedule too with the parameters resolution. I think that really helped. I think we may have hit the low point in the market because rates then went up a little bit at the end of last week. So I will step through a couple of other items within the report. And again, the rate that we had in the parameter resolution, as you can see on the second page there, was 4%, so we were well below that, no problem. They have already signed the proposal form and locked into that rate on behalf of the district, so you will be ratifying the sale tonight as part of the resolution that is before you. I will go through the attachments. So attachments page 1 and 2 are the bid tab, the nice low bid from Piper Jaffray out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, but you had bids from throughout the country within those 10 bids, New Jersey, Tennessee, a number from New York, others from Minnesota, Illinois. So that was nice to see. And then starting on pages 3, those are schedules that were included in your pre-sale report last month. So we just have updated those to include the sale results. But lots of good news on page 3, the sources and uses schedule. The premium that we received was actually a little bit bigger, so we don't need to use any of your debt service funds on hand, which we had planned to use, and we have a little bit more available for your project costs. So kind of a win-win-win in terms of the information included on that page. The detailed debt service schedule for this issue is on page 4. And then your long-term plan, which we show you many times, you'll get used to seeing that from us on pages 4 and 5, showing some nice step downs in your tax rate too on page 6 then of the report. Page 7 then shows you the tax rate or the interest rates over the last couple of years, and you'll see that we definitely hit it on a downturn in the interest rates over the last month, so that's good to see. I think we're going to see that tick back up a little bit, but we're happy that we got you in last Wednesday at the low point. And then the press release from Moody's is on page 8, followed by the detailed credit opinion on pages 9 and 10. So you'll see in terms of the credit strengths on page 9, they mentioned the large wealthy tax base, very strong income levels, voter support for operating levy increases. So we talked about that quite a bit in terms of the initial levy increase and then the step up in fiscal year 2021, which will be coming. So they were happy to see that and encouraged by that news. And then credit challenges. They did mention satisfactory but below sector median reserves, so your fund balance is a little bit lower than what they see nationwide for districts that are rated with a AAA. And then the above average debt and pension burden is one that we commonly see for all school districts in the state of Minnesota, especially because of the TRA plan. So that is a comment that is almost always in the Minnesota School District credit opinions. And then followed by lots of detailed information.
Sorry, what is the median reserve for our
I think they
sector?
told us it was about 20%. So it is, and many states, you know, it's nationwide, so there are a lot of states with much higher fund balance reserve levels than we have in the state of Minnesota. So that kind of skews the data too, but yes, they are.
Very high.
Yes.
There's also a relative factor of how much states have on hand that affects the level that you need, and how much they have, what their funding and payment schedule is, and also how you operate your district all factor into that. So it's not just as simple as a number.
So then lots of detailed information on the credit opinion, continuing through then page 13 is the final page really of that report. And before I forget, I don't want to forget to mention that we take a look at all of your existing debt continually to see if there's any refunding opportunities. And we summarize kind of your refunding opportunities in a report that we send out to the district twice a year. And we do have a nice refunding opportunity that will likely be the best time to probably do it will be this fall. You have a 2011 B bond issue that has a February 1st, 2020 call date. You can actually close on a refunding of that bond as a current refunding within 90 days of that call date. So in the past, I think we've looked at refunding opportunities for you and have brought those forward to you sometimes as advanced, sometimes as current. The Tax Reform Act of 2017 disallowed tax-exempt advanced refunding transactions, so we can no longer do those, but it's going to be a really attractive current refunding opportunity this fall, and our current estimates are showing savings of just over $1 million. So $1,069,000. So we'll hopefully be back with more good news again this fall for your taxpayers. So just kind of wanted to let you know that that's on the horizon. In addition to the great rates that we got here, we think we'll have some nice savings for you this fall for your taxpayers. Awesome.
Great.
Thank you.
Are there
All
any
right.
questions?
Any questions?
This really is a huge accomplishment for the finance group as a whole, and also speaks to the strength of our community and our schools and the district as a whole. That is the main balance upon which it is judged. So it shows the strength of the EPS district. Thank you, guys.
All right, all those in favor of ratifying the award of the sale described, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried.
Great.
Thank you very much.
We very much appreciate the opportunity to be of service to you, and we're so happy that the results turned out well. Thank you. And thank you, Margot.
Next, can I get a motion to approve the contract provided to us for the Edina Community Center Normandale toilet renovations?
So motion, so moved.
Second.
All right, Margot, this went out for bid.
Yes, and it was already titled. I almost renamed it, but that's what the backup said, so it truly is what it says. It is part, in all seriousness, it is part of the deferred maintenance that we just approved bonds for. This is one component of that, so it flows well together. And happy to report we got very competitive bids and are able to recommend base bid plus alternate one, and we are within budget. And what answer? And we have worked with this contractor before.
Any questions? All those in favor of approving the contract for the renovations, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried. Next, can I get a motion to approve the contracts for the Creek Valley Elementary playground improvements?
So moved.
Margot.
I think it was at last meeting, a gift was approved for the donations from the PTO for the playground. This is awarding the various contracts, and so there's quite a bit of detail in there. It's all within the budget. The playground will be funded primarily through PTO, well, partially through PTO funds, a little bit of Creek Valley capital, a small amount of district-wide capital, and then the remaining is long-term facility maintenance, because there is a portion that does qualify for that. So the two major sources are the PTO funds and long-term facility maintenance. And again, it's within budget and would ask for your approval.
Say, Margot, oh.
Go ahead. No, I was asking if there were questions.
Do you know how, if we have a guesstimate as how long it took their PTO to raise that amount of money to support this? Because it's quite a bit.
I don't know that. I'd have to ask Carrie.
Oh, looks like Erica might know.
Oh, okay.
It's been about 10 years.
That's kind of what I figured.
Yeah.
And is this just to help all of our PTOs and obviously elementaries in this case? Is it about a 10-year or 10-plus year rotation that they need to be thinking about, setting aside funds for updating playgrounds?
I think that would be a good benchmark. We're just, we've been doing long-term facility maintenance with the 10-year plan, just in our facilities in general. And now that we got through the bond construction, Erik Hamilton, Director of Buildings and Grounds, has really been working on, okay, we have our indoor spaces, but also our outdoor spaces, and what kind of cycle could we be on? How do we partner it with our long-term facility maintenance so that it can be helpful to PTOs? Because it's a lot to do. It's very, very expensive, or the earth, everything, the equipment, the earth moving, all of it. So, but I would say every 10, it may need to be done sooner, but realistically, it's probably going to be that. So between the fundraising and getting back to it, so.
And just one final question, because I know this comes up a lot. The PTOs, in whatever fundraising that they do, then their efforts, though, for any playground work needs to be coordinated with the district, and all that playground then is owned by the district.
Yes, yes, and we do want the coordination with the district because we want their funds spent wisely, and we have many years ago where well-intentioned parents fundraised and had a plan started, but there wasn't a conversation about the actual space and the earthwork, what needed to be done under the ground. And so there were additional costs, and that's where we need to work on it together, so that if people have really worked hard to generate funds, we want to make sure we're maximizing those and doing what's intended, and then there's not surprises along the way, because that doesn't make anybody happy.
I had a quick question. I don't know if you can answer it, but it might be more an Erik Hamilton question. Do you know what surface they're planning on using around the play equipment? And the reason I'm asking is because I know when Cornelia did their renovation, the play or the material they used for infill is ADA compliant, but they now are having issues with students with wheelchairs actually accessing the playground, and I wanted to just check to see if Creek Valley has considered that, especially with the student population that's at Creek Valley.
I believe they have, but I can't say 100% for sure, so I will make a note and get back to you, and I'll visit with Erik.
Okay, thank you.
All right. All those in favor of approving the contract for the Creek Valley Elementary School playground improvements, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried. Can I get a motion to approve the purchase of 5 used buses from Hoagland Bus Company?
So moved.
Margot.
This is our annual replacement of aging buses. I'm happy to report, similar to 2 years ago, David was able to, Hoagland Bus actually has some buses coming off a lease early, only used 1 year, low mileage, warranty still in place, has all the Minnesota state requirements for a vehicle. So we're able to actually purchase 5 with the dollars that we have, which is awesome. I do apologize, I had attached last year's detail for you in your board packet, but that's part of the handout, one of the handouts that you have, the quote analysis for this year. So I would ask for your approval, answer any questions that you have.
And this just continues our cycle that you guys have put into place to replace buses on a regular basis rather than falling into a situation where we would have to place a great deal at one time.
Yes.
Thank you.
Our annual allocation. And it comes out of capital.
And you're comfortable that this approach gets us more years per dollar of usage, equal to or more years of usage per dollar? So if we bought a new bus, you'd get, comparing a new versus used, you've kind of looked at it and go, this one will get us an equal or less expensive.
Yes, because they're only a year old and they're still under warranty, and also now with our new facility and we have a wash bay, so I think all of that combines together.
Any other questions? All those in favor of approving the purchase of the 5 used buses from Hoagland Bus, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried. Next, can I get a motion to accept? Thank you, Margot. Can I get a motion to accept revised policy 502?
So moved.
Can I get a second? Amir.
All right, so it's policy we discussed last meeting, and it has since been narrowed to only authorize use of the trained canines in school parking areas. Other areas inside the school would still be subject to search, as the longstanding policy has, if there's reasonable suspicion, but that reasonable suspicion isn't authorized to come from a trained canine. Questions?
I have questions. I personally would, I would like to request that we have time to discuss this at a work session, so we can have a more in-depth discussion about this policy and some questions that I personally have that I think that we need to discuss before approving this policy. And one thing that I would like to understand, which I asked last time, is I'd like to get a better understanding of what is the high schools in our district's holistic approach to the drug issue at the school, and how does this policy support these efforts? And I want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence to map out what are the implications of instituting this policy. Do we need to look at the discipline policy? Does this policy help with things like kids selling prescription pills? I just want to make sure that we're doing what we need to do from a school management and implementation perspective, and that that's driving policy, not that our policy is actually driving what we should be doing from a drug safety perspective. And my concern is that this is just one tool in a larger toolkit, and I think it's such an issue that it deserves a broader discussion for us to have as a board. So that's.
So I would just throw out there that I think there are kind of three ways to approach what you're saying. One is if you think that the broader conversation, and not that there isn't a holistic approach, but the broader conversation reviewing that wouldn't happen if you don't hold this up, that this is like a trigger to make that conversation happen. I don't know that that's the case. Another way to look at your request is that that broader conversation would uncover a reason that this is a misguided plan. And I don't know that I don't see any indication of that at this point. And then the third way, which is kind of where I approach it, is that what you're saying is reasonable and prudent, and there should be maybe a more of a longer look, even from the governance level, at response to the concerns about illegal substances and the accompanying problems in our schools. And I would support that. I don't push back on that, but I don't see that tied to not getting this particular measure approved this meeting. And I will say there's been some talk about when the first use would be. Maybe it would be delayed to be part of more of a comprehensive look or to be part of a longer consideration of this. I don't know that that has unanimous support either. I think there's also a concern of, look, if you know that this one thing is a reasonable step and you had some intention to take the first week, maybe even this school year, don't hold up just because there are other things to do. No one says that we have to move forward in lockstep, but that's also not a unanimous position, and I support that. But I just want to clarify, I would support pushing this particular approval forward tonight and not letting go of another concern of yours and bringing it up again.
I'm fine with that. I want to make sure that, my main concern is I want to make sure that we're not approving this policy under the presumption that doing this is the only thing that needs to be done about what's going on at the high school, and that we really need to have a broader discussion from a governance perspective to make sure that, are there other things that we need to do? Do we need to add things to this policy? And like I said, do we need to look at our discipline policy in conjunction to this? And that's my concern, is that we're taking a more holistic approach, and it's not just about now that we have these dogs in the parking lot. And I'm not saying that's what we're trying to do, but I do think that this needs to be a larger discussion. And then in addition to that, I just had a question from a policy perspective, and it talks about, we have, and just for everyone's reference, in Section 2, the general statement of policy, D says, under personal possessions and student's person, it says, when a school official has reasonable suspicion that a search will uncover a violation of law, the school, basically it says, the school official may search a student's personal possessions. And then the second section is about canine searches. So my question is, do cars fall under a personal possession? Because then, if a car is a personal possession, we say that it requires a reasonable suspicion, but under canine searches, it looks like it's more a random search, and you wouldn't require the reasonable suspicion.
The indication from the canine is the reasonable suspicion.
That is a reasonable
And that's
suspicion.
not the only way to come up with a reasonable suspicion, which is why student lockers could also be searched. We wouldn't authorize a dog near the locker, and yet you may still have another source of reasonable suspicion. It's a relatively low threshold as far as these legal thresholds go. It can't be a hunch. It can't be a guess, a suspicion. It can't be random. But it's a relatively low threshold. Students don't have very much power over their locker to say, you know, I need to see a warrant, and then they can record themselves saying, I told them I got to have a warrant. You can't do that. And so that Section D is separate from Section E. Section D says If there's reasonable suspicion, the school could look in a locker and other places in compliance with law and policy and rules. That's what it's getting at. And then Section E mentions that we authorize the use of specially trained dogs in the parking lot by school officials, which is more of a, I wouldn't say random search, but it's a search that doesn't require reasonable suspicion to get it started. And then once the dog indicates that it has detected something in a particular student's car, then you have reasonable suspicion to contact the student, ask to have them open the car. They may still refuse, and it's not like we would put a boot on the car and go that route, but they may suffer an administrative response, as the policy says here, such as loss of parking privileges.
So I guess from my perspective, it would be more clear if in Section E, it's stated that an alert from a dog is considered reasonable suspicion.
It says that in number 3 definitions, reasonable suspicion, and it's been added, an alert from a specially trained dog.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem.
Now that makes much more sense to me. Thank you, guys.
So I have a couple of questions. I actually thought Principal Beaton was going to be here to answer them, but maybe you know them. First, what is the issue that we're after by having dogs in the parking lot?
I wouldn't say that I have a holistic response to your question.
I mean, I know this was a recommendation from the principal, which is why, and in fact, I just went back to the minutes and it said that we had asked for him to be here. And so I thought, because before adopting a policy, my first question is, so what are the issues we're trying to address?
So
Can
I
Dr.
wouldn't speak
Schultz
for
answer
him,
that
and
question
maybe Schultz
for
can
us?
for him, but I just want to throw out one particular point, and that is, I think it's a reasonable request among community members that if there's concern about drugs on campus and you know that this is one measure that could help deter that problem, and it lends itself to a lot of things: education, deterrence, supervision, enforcement, and if it's as simple as authorizing this particular measure, and then the administrators have so much discretion, so much other power and control and resources that they can leverage and adapt to what they see is best for our students in compliance with law and policy. It's all part of a big response. And to say no here sounds like we're erring on the side of something that I wouldn't want to err on. And I don't know if that's denial or privacy or something where there's enough reason to at least authorize the administration to have this tool. And I agree with you. We did sort of say, we shouldn't say so, we did say it would be helpful to have him here again. He did come to our first policy committee meeting. I didn't ask him to come to this next meeting. He wasn't at our second policy meeting, so maybe that's on me. But there wasn't in particular something that I found lacking in his response. And John, I'll let you speak to it too, but I found this to be a reasonable request and one that has concerns about a holistic response, which he has authorization already for many of those levers, but maybe a concern about providing him more resources, more training, more time. There may be some of those, but I think this is a fine request, and I'm in favor of voting in favor of it tonight.
So, if you have an answer.
So the rationale that Principal Beaton and I talked about when this came forward was really just to give the high school another tool for managing the presence of chemicals on campus. It's as simple as that.
And so, I mean, I could infer that if you have dogs, that it might slow down drug use or drug prevalence. It seems to me that we've talked about being a data-driven board, and so now I'm faced with a policy, and so the question is, what's the issue we're after? What's the evidence that this will solve the issue, as opposed to assumptions that we're making at this point? What happens if they find contraband? So there are options for student discipline, I take it. But do we know do they notify the police if the contraband is an illegal substance?
Don't we have separate policy?
It's under
It would have to be under the discipline policy, and I don't know that well enough to say that. I don't know if anybody, Gwen, do you have any?
What is the discipline policy number?
Actually, excuse me, is the question that if drugs are found by a sniffing dog, is that what you're asking, Lenny, or is there a
Correct.
different question? Well, the
Illegal
dog,
drugs.
the police officer has the dog, and so if drugs are found, then it becomes a police matter. Excuse me, I have a cold.
No, that's not how it's not, well, what we said was a little different policy. I just want to clarify, because it's not the same as saying the police officer would search the vehicle. It's that the police officer would report an indication from the dog, and then from there, it's an administrative response.
But I thought Lenny was saying if there were drugs found, but maybe I misunderstood.
I think he might have
Maybe I
phrased it that
misunderstood.
way, that if the police officer found the drugs, but our response as communicated at the last meeting in the policy committee was that this would be an administrative response to that indication, that our administrators aren't handling the dog, but they take the information about what the dog handler found.
So I think
and
there's two
deal
things.
with it administratively.
I think there's two things going on here.
There are
There's-
two parts to this.
Yeah.
And so one is there's a police matter, and then the administrator then works with the police as well on the situation. So it's a dual process that we work with the police, and then notifying the family. The administrator notifies the family that drugs have been found, and then we follow the policy, our discipline policy as well. Does that answer your question, Lenny? Because I'm still not clear what specifically your question was.
So when I read through this, if the student says you can't, if the car's identified by the dog and the student says, no, you can't open it, then it presumably stays an administrative matter because there's no illegal substance that's found. It seems to me if they then open the car and find an illegal substance, that becomes a police matter as well as an administrative matter, just because you can't stop the police aspect of locating an illegal drug.
I think that there's two things going on. One is when the dog is doing the search, there is a hit on the car.
Right.
And then then it's the administrator to bring the student in and do the search or proceed with the procedures for the search of the car. If contraband is found, then it's like finding contraband in our school. It isn't any different whether you find it on grounds, whether you find it in the school, or you find it in the car. And then we go through the same procedures that we've always gone through with drug contraband.
I guess that was going to be my question, is what is the difference if a dog made a hit on the car? What if it fell out of their backpack or something? I mean, whatever way you find it, we must have a procedure of how that is handled. So I don't see how this would be different just because it was a dog sniffing it.
Well, it says in section 6, it says if a search yields contraband, school officials will seize the item and, where appropriate, turn it over to legal officials for ultimate disposition.
And that was in there prior to the dog portion.
So do we have an opinion from someone within administration that there's an issue that exists that they believe that this will address and that this is the best way to address it? And I don't mean a written opinion, but I mean, is that the gist of what was presented to the policy committee, or were you just making assumptions?
I think this was a request by the principal to have an additional tool to have another area of the school have surveillance of another area of the school related to chemicals that we don't normally look at. So to say it's tied to a data point related to drug use, no, we don't have any of that. Which goes to Erica's argument of having a more holistic look at this, which is something we can do too.
And I think the holistic approach is good, and I do think there are other things going on. But when we take a look at this, to me, we already have a search policy. This is just adding another way of doing searches. And the bottom line is, these are looking for illegal substances that a student shouldn't have in the first place, let alone have on our campuses. So I'm not sure what we're trying to protect somebody from in finding that they've broken the law or rules or policy. To me, this seems, I mean, because this could have gone further, and dogs being in school and finding it in other ways. So I guess I'm not understanding why there would be a problem with this. I mean, the bottom line is, to me, it's unwelcoming that my kid has to go to school and see these things or be exposed to these things at the high school. So this to me is just exactly what Dr. Schultz said. It's a tool. And I hope and then ultimately it should discourage students, but in the end, they shouldn't have had it there in the first place.
So I'm certainly not in favor of illegal substances in the school. What I'm trying to understand is just to make sure that there's someone behind this policy who says they believe there's an issue, they believe that this is the best way to address the issue, and that we as a board understand the consequences. And then just as a technical matter, this is a contraband policy, but it doesn't call for a search of the vehicles for contraband. It all of a sudden uses prohibited items and illicit substances. It kind of changes the terminology right in the middle of what is being authorized. And that logically doesn't make sense. It should say that it would alert officials to the presence of contraband, since that's what the policy is. Because now you're using terms that are undefined. But so all I was looking for was, is there is there
Dog alert to contraband versus illicit substances.
so when you have a defined term and your policy is set to address that defined term, to start using other terms within it without defining them becomes problematic.
So what illicit substances, what would that be that chemicals aren't or drugs aren't?
I don't know what an illicit substance is. I mean, it could be an illegal drug. It could be a prescription that isn't made out to you, because you're not allowed to have a prescription that's not made out to you. That might be I don't know. If you're telling me that someone came before the committee and said that this is a policy that is intended to address an issue that they professionally believe exists, and that this is tailored to address it, then I'm ultimately not going to oppose it. I do think that this policy needs more work, and it does need, as Erica said, a more holistic approach.
If I could jump in, it was administratively driven, and I don't know if we heard of counts, and there wasn't data behind it, but I do know that anecdotally, there are kids who are taking advantage of drugs when they otherwise wouldn't have. It seems to be a problem of opportunity, the opportunity of availability, and were the availability not there, the child would not have been tempted to use it. And so there's a very active concern among a set of parents that their kids would not have been involved had the availability of the substance not been there on school property. And I think that that's driving part of this. The rules are already in place. It's just an extension of the realm that we're going actively into the parking lot, which is already school property, and the substance shouldn't be there. So, and I think it's somewhat urgent in the sense that the earlier a child starts abusing drugs, the more likely they are to have a problem with it in their lifetime. And so I think expanding the tool set of our administration to get on top of this fast is pretty important. And so I would like to move this forward pretty quickly. And then to address Erica's concern that this is incremental. It is in no way to be interpreted as a holistic drug policy. Drugs are talked about in health classes. But I think that I would be open to a workshop, a work session where we do talk about it. So to me, approval of this policy does not in any way mean that this is a substitution for other very significant education and other interactions that we ought to do as a school district regarding illegal substances.
And I just want to mention, I don't know what the situation is. You know, you want to talk about data-driven. Is it on the rise or is it unusually high? I have no evidence that it's any higher than in any other high school. So I'm just going to say that. I know that Andy Beaton came to the policy meeting, and he came here from Bloomington, and they have this policy there. He told us that Wayzata and Minnetonka have this policy as well. So this isn't something that seems as if it's, I think we are more the outlier without having this policy than having it. And when the principal came, I had to listen to him and think that he understands how he would manage this situation, and I took his advice. That's where I was going.
So, Lenny, I want to respond to some of your points and then offer a correction too. Some of the points I would normally applaud. You know, the request for data, where's the data? That's something that it's kind of been a minority championing point for a long time.
Let me just interrupt for a second, because I have scaled it back to at least is there, a recommendation?
I know, I've heard that too.
Okay.
I mean, you're being very clear, and I think you're looking for something reasonable, but you're also, at one point you mentioned the policy needs to be holistic, but I think what you meant was maybe like the district's approach or its response to a very complex problem needs to be holistic. Not this policy, because this is a very narrow policy about search. And your concern about the word, I respect that technical catch. I will say it's not like it's a glaring loophole, because it does say contraband, but it says contraband is an unauthorized item, possession of which is prohibited. Later it says prohibited item. And it says contraband includes controlled substances. Later it says illicit substances. So you're right. It's not exactly a match, but it's also not a glaring omission. If the board wants to edit those words and come back to this in a month, I'm not going to argue that point, but I don't think it's, if we approved it tonight, I don't think it would be limiting. And then the correction is I did confirm our discipline policy about controlled substances and alcohol or chemicals, if it's for personal use, possession, or uses, up to the building administration in primary. But in secondary, well, 6 through 12, I should say 6 through 12, it's 3-day suspension and police referral is our policy in a separate policy. And it gets more of a suspension, 10 days, if there's an intent to distribute. So to the extent that I've been repeating the notion that should the car have consent to search and the administration finds a search and we complied with our policy, that does include this police referral, which I've said otherwise previously tonight.
So is the bottom line from it that the presentation to the committee was that this was proposed by Principal Beaton because he believes there is a legitimate issue out there and that this is a reasonable way to address it?
Yes, and that this is the reason. This is a part of a reasonable way to address it, which is currently not addressed in policy. And so he was coming to the policy committee for a detail of his thoughts, which was it wasn't exactly prohibited, but it wasn't addressed in policy. And so he wasn't coming to us in response to board and committee concern about the drug problem, but out of a need to update policy to have his response be backed up, his response, which included this component. And I think that's partly where this conversation is getting stuck, is that we keep thinking about a bigger picture when it really, this whole conversation began with a rather narrow component that touched the board policy directly.
And so if we pass this, then we're agreeing that we'll come back and try to request a broader approach to issues within the district.
I think that has broad consensus.
Okay? All right, I think
Because I don't think technically these dogs are going to be catching vaping materials, and vaping materials are a huge problem.
well, same with alcohol.
And I would,
And I wouldn't describe alcohol as a huge problem, but it is an issue. Don't want to start throwing in.
but the fact that a student can't really use a high school bathroom without being exposed to vaping is getting out of control. So I wholeheartedly endorse a further discussion on this and how we can work with our kids to move past these things.
And I agree, I didn't mention it, but I totally agree that there should be a board work session or discussion on what is going on. I can't say that I know even, but I believe that we really do have programs at the high school. I know that we do, and I'd like to hear about them before we are just assuming that we don't and that we're not actively working toward this. So I do feel strongly that there should be a holistic approach. I am a little, I can understand, I do like having a tidy policy where everything is defined, but I don't really want to necessarily wait on this either.
The only other request I would make is, as we look at consequences, that we might want to get information on first offense, because I think that we can understand that teenagers sometimes make bad decisions, and I'm not sure that I want to have a policy in place that creates an issue over a lifetime for a bad mistake that's once. All right, any other questions? All those in favor of approving policy 502 as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Let's see where else. Do we have any updates? Committee updates? I think that's where we're on to, aren't we? No committee updates? I think we've had, all right. No.
We had talked about possibly having a further discussion, and I can try to relate this back to teaching and learning. So in our discussion this evening at our work session, we were talking about MAP data, and there were some questions within that. And then board member Ellen brought up wanting to take a deeper look at how that can tie into the strategic plan, and many board members brought that up. So I'm just wondering, I think there was talk right at the end of possibly looking to add a work session regarding strategic planning around assessment and data and trajectory of what has caused some of the drops in test scores. So I thought I'd just bring that up as part of our update to see if there was any consensus or further discussion around that topic of adding a work session.
So I think Matt had also talked about having a small group of the board get together to try to create an outline for a next meeting and getting that approved by the board. And then, I mean, we can schedule the meeting in the interim. And I think we had a placeholder of May 6th. It's just a matter of how quickly we can get information together. But I think that is the plan.
I still had questions when we left the meeting, so I was bringing it up for you.
Oh, nope, I don't have answers to any of my questions anyway. I think that the small group will help facilitate that.
So just for clarification,
to
Matt's
do- oh.
idea would be that we'd have somebody before May 6th?
Yeah, my
Yes.
idea was listening to the conversation we've had. Going into the strategic planning meeting, one of the goals was to have a consistent set of data upon which we would all review it and discuss it, and then think about what's working, what's not, what do we want to change, what's not, and how do we track changes. We all, I think, felt like, as especially myself, Ellen, and Sarah, working as kind of a coordinating committee on the strategic planning group, that we were a little data light in some of these categories. So the question now was, instead of having more work sessions without giving guidance from the board initially, what we're looking for to the administration, that a smaller subgroup of the board would work with a few lead team members and John to talk about what would be a great way to present the data between us, and then have a work session after that, rather than just the idea of going into the work sessions when it seems like we're just kind of missing each other a little bit would be better. So small groups would connect, then have another work session.
So what kind of small group are you going to assign to this? That would be my question. Or would you send it back to that original committee that worked on the strategic plan?
So either I don't have an answer to that yet. I would like to know who would want to be on that small subgroup, though.
I would.
I think I would. Like,
I'm certainly willing to be on it since I was on the other committee, but I don't want to oust anybody else who wants to do it, so.
I'm just collecting names for the moment.
There we go.
All right. All right. Anything else? We have completed our agenda. Is there any objection to adjourning? Hearing none, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.